This was not a Nazi invention. This was an Islamic invention. By 1090, the Pope in Europe called upon the Christians, because the Muslims have even conquered Jerusalem, and they were subjugating the Christians in the holy city of Jerusalem, the birth of Christ. And the Pope in Europe told the Christians, how could you sit silently in Europe while watching what the Muslims were doing to your brethren in the Holy Land? And this is when the Crusaders were launched. The Crusades were not launched because all of a sudden they woke up one morning and they decided, we're going to go kill a bunch of people because we decided to spread Christianity. The Crusaders were launched as a response to Islam in order to go defend and protect Christians who were subjugated under Islam and to liberate the city of Jerusalem. And the Crusaders were able to liberate Jerusalem for less than 100 years before Saladin went back and conquered Jerusalem and took it, captured it to Islamic land and continued subjugating the Christians. And Jerusalem continued being controlled under Islamic land until 1967, when the State of Israel liberated Jerusalem, where for the first time Christians and Jews in centuries were able to worship in the old city of Jerusalem, together uniting the city as one. The Crusaders fought Islam for 300 years and failed miserably. They could not win against Islam. And by the 1300s, the Crusaders gave up and dissipated and went away. And Islam continued to grow. It grew out of the Middle East. It went into China. It conquered Spain. It conquered parts of Italy, parts of Europe. And by the 1600s, Islam had covered more of the earth's surface than the Roman Empire did at its peak. And during that war and during that expansion, 280 million people died. 80 million Hindus were butchered under Islam when Islam conquered India and the Indian continent. Because under Islam, only Jews and Christians were protected dhimmis, allowed to stay alive if they did not convert to Islam, and they were allowed to stay alive when they paid the jizya. Any other group of people who were not the people of the book either had to convert or die. They were not allowed to pay the jizya. By the 1600s, Christian Europe was becoming more industrial. The industrial revolution in Europe had begun. Europeans figured out a way to create factory lines where people were able to stand on lines and manufacture products. That gave the Europeans, Christian Europe, the money and the wealth and the power in order to finance armies, create armies, and develop weaponry and launch attacks against Muslim occupiers in order to liberate Christian land conquered by Islam. They were able to liberate Spain. They were able to liberate parts of Italy. They went back and liberated parts of France. They were able to stop the Muslims at the gates of Vienna. And as Christian Europe liberated lands that was occupied by Islam, Islamic countries, Islam started to shrink worldwide, and Muslims began to lose financing that they used to get from the Christians and the Jews who created wealth to the Muslims by working and paying the jizya. So as more Christian and Jewish lands were liberated, where tribes did not have to pay the jizya, Muslims started getting defeated and started getting poorer and poorer because they did not have the ability to develop products like the Europeans. And 400 years later, in 1924, the Islamic Empire ended in Turkey by President Ataturk, who ended the Islamic Empire and gave women rights to vote, gave women rights to get an education, gave women the right to choose over their lives who they want to marry, gave women the right to choose whether they want to cover with a hijab or not. The Muslims called him the Jewish agent. They accused him of having a Jewish mother because he was the kiss of death of the Muslim empire. The Islamic empire ended less than 100 years ago. Less than 100 years ago. Isn't it amazing how little we know of history? It is shocking. So, as Ataturk ended the Islamic Empire in 1924, In 1928, group of devout Muslims looked around and they said to themselves, Islam is superior to any other religion. Islam had conquered many nations and covered most of the earth for 1400 years. Islam prospered because we subjugated Christians and Jews in any other land. And we did that through jihad, military war, in conquering the infidels according to the commandments of the Quran. And the Muslim Brotherhood was launched in Egypt 5 years later after the Islamic Empire ended in 1928 in order to usher in the new era of Islam, revive the Islamic Empire and conquer the West and Western civilization because they believed Western civilization was subjugating Islam. The Muslim Brotherhood is the mothership that was launched where what we call today radical Islam. The Muslim Brotherhood has 70 offshoot terrorist organizations spread throughout the world. Al-Qaeda and Hamas are an outburst of the Muslim Brotherhood. Ayman al-Zawahiri, the second man of Al-Qaeda, was a leader of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. So, those who tell you that radical Islam today is just little extremists because they are upset with us because of our foreign policy need to learn history in order to understand why radical Islam is on the march today. What they are trying to do is take back what they believe was rightfully theirs. This is why when we saw the bombing in Spain in 2004, remember the bombings in Madrid? There was a letter left by the bomber who said, this is in revenge for Andalusia. Andalusia was the name of Spain because as Muslims conquered lands, they changed the name of the cities to Arabic names. Yes, he was talking about taking revenge for 500 years ago. While we in America are the McDonald's generation, we lose our patience if we were not served our hamburger in 5 minutes on the drive-thru. They are going back 500 years. And this is why radical Islam is on the march. Radical Islam is on the march because they want to create the Islamic Empire. And in order for them to do that, they have to conquer Western nations and bring back the Islamic glory. The Muslim Brotherhood is spread around the world. The Muslim Brotherhood, we found after September 11th, a document that was written by the Muslim Brotherhood in 1982. The title of the document was the 100-year plan for radical Islam to infiltrate and dominate the West and establish an Islamic government on earth. In the counterterrorism circles, that document became known as the Project. In my book, They Must Be Stopped, Why We Must Defeat Radical Islam and How We Can Do It, I dedicated a chapter to the Muslim Brotherhood Project for North America. Now, what makes the Muslim Brotherhood Project very important is because they give tactics and proposals and details as to how to infiltrate the West, how to infiltrate parties, political parties in the West in order to sway opinion, how to get Muslim democratically elected into office and every position in government, in NGOs, in government, in businesses, on school boards, in city councils, in local governments all over Western nations. They talk about how to build social networks within the inner cities and recruit, how to recruit through mosques, how to recruit through madrasas, how to work with like-minded progressive organizations that share similar goals. And this is exactly how radical Islam is advancing. When you look at Europe today, the Muslim Brotherhood Project was written in 1982, almost 30 years ago. When you look at Europe today, when the Muslim Brotherhood Project began being implemented in Europe, Europe is no longer Europe. Europe has become Eurabia. The Europe that you remember you used to go visit 20 years ago and that your parents remember does not exist anymore. Europe has morphed into Eurabia.